Hi, everybody. This is Psychic Eddie, and welcome to Lucky Days Astrology. And normally, what I do on the show is I do a free mini reading, meaning I look at somebody's chart and give people an idea of their natural inclinations towards luck and good fortune and where their natural talents and strengths lie. And then I talk about some lucky periods of time coming up in the next month, and it's a free mini reading. If you are interested in having one done, just email me your name and phone number or name and email address, and I'll get back to you and tell you what I need. Now, I also do full-fledged professional, complete psychic and astrology readings where we go into your whole chart and talk about some of your lucky signs in that chart, natural strengths and talents that you can utilize. We look at the next 3 months, and I give you some fortunate periods of time coming up that you can do, play the lotto, that sort of thing, or if you want to thinking about starting a new business, whatever enterprise that needs a little bit of extra luck, I give you your own personal lucky numbers, and then I answer your questions psychically. So if you might be interested in something like that, again, just email me your name and phone number or your name and email address, and I'll get back to you and show you how it works. Now, please bear with me. I have a bit of a cough, so I'm kind of struggling through this a bit. Today, we're going to talk about Wild Bill Hickok. And rather than go into a lot of detail about who he was, I'm assuming most of you know a little bit about him as a Civil War scout and a marshal, and then his legendary death in Deadwood at the hands of somebody who snuck up behind him and shot him. Rather than go into details of his life, I'm going to talk a little bit about his astrology chart. And I also looked a little bit about what was going on in the sky at the time of his death. Now, can death be foretold in astrology? No, it can't. At least I don't think so, and I don't think anybody who's an honest astrologer, will tell you that it can. I don't think it can be. But there are certain aspects in a chart that you can look at that really can point to periods of either very good luck or periods of really a lot of dark clouds. And he had a lot of dark clouds around that time that he was shot. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Oftentimes that when I do a reading for somebody who's in the middle of something going bad, I can look at their chart and give them an idea of how long that period of time is going to last and when it's going to end. And I've done it several times and done it for myself as well. But let's talk a little bit about his chart. And I'm going to refer to my notes here, if you don't mind, because it gets a little bit complicated. He had a chart is a little bit like a pizza with 12 slices, and each slice represents a different aspect of your life. And where your personal planets fall on that pizza, meaning your Sun and Mercury and Venus and Mars, where they are on your chart kind of illustrates areas of your life that are going to be very, very significant and often point to aspects of your personality as well. So he had something very interesting, or a couple of things. He had his sun sign and his Venus sign right next to each other, right on top of each other. It's called a conjunction. And people who have that can have women who have that are very beautiful. Men who have that are very, very charismatic. And apparently, what a lot of people said about Wild Bill was he was extremely charismatic. He was a man that other men looked to and said, wow, gee, I'd like to be like him. He had a natural popularity. He had a natural aura where he would be noticed, partly by the way he dressed and partly by the way he carried himself. But he just had sort of he dressed a little bit like a dandy, I would say, which was a little out of place in certain areas that he was in the middle of Deadwood, where there's a lot of mud around and gold miners and people with mud all over their faces. He'd be all dressed up real nice, so he stood out that way. And he was also a very popular guy too. People just naturally liked him and took to him. So He also had. I also look for areas in a chart pertaining to luck with gambling and good fortune. Okay, did he have that in his chart? Some people do, and some people don't. I would say that he did. He had again a sign of Venus was making a positive aspect in his chart to Jupiter. Now again, Venus is pleasure, and Venus is can almost mean good fortune in a chart. Jupiter is expansion, so Venus and Jupiter together, expansion of good fortune. So he had I think he experienced a lot of luck through the forcefulness of his personality. And he also was a gambler as well. Now, there's been some speculation as to whether he was a good gambler or a bad gambler. I've heard both sides of the story, but he certainly would have an inclination to have a familiarity with a deck of cards and know how to use them and probably know how to win with them as well. Okay. Now, he had some other things as well. He had that Venus sign, again, was making an aspect to his, another part of his chart, Uranus. Uranus is sudden change. And in his chart, with his Venus making a negative aspect to this planet Uranus, he had a lot of restlessness. He couldn't keep still. He tried a lot of different things and ultimately felt that he was kind of a failure at all of them. Even though he was very, very successful at the end of his life, his eyesight was going bad. He felt he was running out of time. He had paranormal premonitions about the end of his life, and it's a matter of record that he commented about it to several people, and they made notes of it. So he just couldn't make any part of his life gel. I think had he been a little bit more stable, he probably would have stayed in one job as a marshal, or he was part of Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He probably would have stayed in that. But just something about him couldn't keep still. He just had to keep moving. So every time he put down roots, he'd dig them up. And in a way, he was his own worst enemy and sort of laying the foundation for the end of his life. He also had Venus is really prominent in his chart, and it's making an aspect to a part of his chart that has to do with the planet Neptune. Now, Neptune has to do with everything that's sort of ethereal and that you can't put your finger on. So psychic ability, mists, fog, the water, those kind of things have to do with Neptune. So again, he sort of had this premonition about himself and his life. And he also had this uncanny ability. He was known as somebody who was very good with the use of his guns. And he had this sort of uncanny ability to hit the target the first time and sort of have an intuition. People used to say he had an instinct or an intuition about how to use firearms. So he got in a lot of scrapes with firearms, but he was quite successful, and he often hit the target dead on the first shot, and often got into gunfight situations where people were in front of him and people were behind him shooting at him at the same time, and he would do well. Now, at one point, he was in a gunfight with somebody, and he shot his deputy accidentally. And that changed his whole outlook completely and just, I think, kind of shattered his life in some respect. He was never really the same after that and started drifting around a little bit. And that's how he ended up in Deadwood, wanting to do gold prospecting. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the things in his chart that were going on at the time of his death. Okay. You look at the planets in the sky and how they're moving around, and they can make different aspects and connections to your chart. And when they make those aspects, things tend to happen. You may not know how they're going to happen, or may be surprised when they happen, but things do happen. And he had the sun in the sky was making a negative aspect to the Saturn in his chart, and Saturn has to do with seriousness, hard lessons. Okay, I had to go get a cough drop because my voice was going, and so hopefully I'll be able to continue. So I was talking a little bit about the movement of planets in the sky and how they can make a connection to the planets in your chart. And when that happens, events will take place in your chart. Your life will change in some way. Sometimes challenges, sometimes good things. In his case, he had three really negative things, or at least I consider them somewhat negative, going on. The sun in the sky was making a negative aspect to the planet Saturn in his chart. Now, Saturn has to do with hard realities, difficult life lessons, that sort of thing. Now, when Wild Bill came to Deadwood, his eyesight was going. He had felt that he had been drifting a lot in his life, and this was his last chance to kind of strike it rich. So he was trying to strike it rich with gold mining, or gold prospecting. He was unsure of his direction in life, and he was feeling more and more like a failure. He was spending a lot of time drinking, a lot of time playing cards. And on the particular day he was shot, he walked into the saloon, sat down at a table, and the only chair available, his back was to the door. And he always sat with his back to the wall. And he asked some of the other card players, can we change places? And they kind of laughed it off and said, nah, you're superstitious, nothing's going to happen. Now, in the past, when he was a marshal and he was kind of on top of his game, they would have moved right away. But because everybody kind of saw that he was kind of on the slide in his life, they didn't take him so seriously, and they didn't accommodate him. Okay. Now, he also had in the sky, the planet Mars was making a negative aspect to Saturn in his chart, and we just talked about Saturn. But Mars has to do with aggression and violence. And again, Saturn has to do with hard realities. So when you have that Mars making a negative aspect, if I was doing a reading for somebody and I saw that, I would say, be careful driving. Be careful in situations where you could get into some kind of accident. Don't do anything reckless. Might not be time to take a risk. Might be time to just sort of coast for the next couple of days. Because Mars can sometimes bring unpredictable things, or incidents even of violence. And that's what happened to Wild Bill. Somebody came in to the door that he had his back to and shot him in the head, and Wild Bill died instantly. This is a guy that he had played cards with the night before, and the guy had lost some money and was bitter about it. The last transit that Wild Bill had going on in his chart was the movement of Saturn in the sky was right on a planet in his chart called Uranus, which has to do with sudden changes in your life. Again, Saturn has to do with hard life lessons, right on top of his planet having to do with sudden changes. So you put all those things together, and you have somewhat of a perfect storm where, or unfortunately, someone can meet with some unfortunate luck, which was the case of Wild Bill. So now that I'm just about losing my voice completely, I'm going to wrap this up and say thank you very much for watching, and thank you again.